Larry Bird could have been the poster boy for the 1950s NBA. He wasn't fast, he wasn't sleek, and he drank draft beer in neighborhood saloons. But when he assembled all the little ordinary, outdated pieces of himself and walked onto a basketball court, he was a player for all ages, styles, and colors. Nobody's white hope, Larry Bird operated above race, reaching heights unheard of, back where he came from.
In high school, yeah, he's going to play in college. But is he going to be the player of the year? No one thought that far ahead. Then his senior year, but yeah, he's the best player in college. Is he going to play in the pros? I don't know. Not very quick, doesn't jump well. But he had that one thing that people couldn't measure.
Oh, boy!
You can't measure a person's heart.
Now that's a steal by Bird. Underneath the DJ, lays it in. What a play by Bird. Oh, my, this place is going crazy.
Sunday morning, French Lick, Indiana. While the townsfolk attend their chosen houses of worship, Springs Valley Gym silently awaits its faithful.
It's a way of life. The coffee shops, the restaurants, the barber shops, everyone talks basketball.
On Friday nights, the gym reverberates with the sound of teenagers, adults, and families. Basketball provides French Lick with its strongest cultural pulse.
It's what forms community in Indiana. It's a culture of basketball. It's rural. It's white kids on farms doing nothing all day long but shooting jump shots so that they are great pure shooters. It's a kid alone with a very simple basket again and again. I remember Larry telling me how he had waxed the net because the net would last longer that way.
Everybody in my town had the same things. It seemed like nothing. So all we did was play sports.
French Lick is among the poorest towns in Indiana, and the Birds among the poorest families. Despite a busy household that included 4 brothers and 1 sister, young Larry suffered from a growing sense of isolation.
He was very quiet and shy. He led by example rather than by word.
He felt awkward. He felt poor. He felt scorned. He wasn't handsome. There was the broken home, a feeling of not having the essential elements of solidity in your family that allows you to feel as good as anyone else. All these things must have made it very painful.
I saw Larry take an F in an English class because he wouldn't speak in front of his own peers.
He loved his father. His father was a flawed man. His father was an alcoholic. His father was a laborer who had skills that he could only bring to bear when he was sober enough to work.
The weekends weren't fun a lot of times because you're young and your father comes in. My mom always had to get up 3 or 4 in the morning, or we had to get up, to make sure, he didn't hurt himself.
Among Joe Bird's private demons was a tour in Korea he couldn't forget.
Joey was through hell in the war. And he saw a lot of buddies killed, and he was in foxholes and stuff, and things like that can drain on a guy's mind. And Georgie even said that he'd wake up at night screaming and hollering, "Get down, get down."
As Joe's alcoholism advanced, the women ran the Bird family. Georgia worked 2 jobs, while Larry's grandmother, Lizzie, watched over the children.
He thought she was God. He'd be sick down here, he thought he had pneumonia. And he says, "I can't practice tonight, Granny." And she put these old-fashioned liniments on him. He come out of it in about 2 or 3 hours and said, "I'm going down." And they played a game that night, and I think he scored more points that night than he had scored in his high school career.
All those lonely hours shooting hoops paid off. After sitting out most of his sophomore season with an ankle injury, Larry sprouted 5 inches over the next 2 years as college scouts began showing up in French Lick to see the 6'7" kid with the 31-point average.
The hype, the excitement of the local town going to those games, it was amazing. We're like, what can he do yet tonight? What's he going to do tonight?
Competitive ain't word for him. if you beat him in pool or playing horse or doing, well, he always wanted a rematch. By then, he'd have you psyched out so bad you couldn't beat him.
He raised himself up and found the one true thing, basketball, that could let him out of what was this tiny island of his own little white ghetto.
Larry chose Indiana University, but when he arrived in Bloomington, the emotional pull of his hometown was just too strong.
Coming from a town that had around 2,000 and going somewhere where they had over 30,000, right away I sensed that I was in the wrong environment.
I don't think he was really ready to go to school. And I wasn't as attuned to what his needs were as a kid as I should have been.
We passed him going to a bookstore at IU, and he didn't, I think Larry acknowledged, just, you know, so I said, "Hi, Coach Knight," and he just kept walking. And it really hurt Larry's feelings.
Plus, I didn't have the funds and the clothing and things I thought I needed to get me through. I made my mind up that I couldn't survive there, and it was time to go.
After just 24 days, Bird retreated to French Lick, enrolled in junior college, and took a job with the street department. Larry was on the job 5 months when his father delivered on a recurrent threat. Joe Bird killed himself at the age of 48.
Larry's hard to figure out because he doesn't really show emotions. I'm sure he had a lot of pain, and he just holds it inside. And that's how he deals with things.
He was crushed that he lost his father. They were very close to their father, even though he wasn't always there. To see the children and to see Mrs. Bird, you know, in that period of time was very difficult.
It definitely was a tough year. There's no question about that. But the one thing that I did was make a decision where I was going to make my own decisions from that point on, and if it was good decisions, that's great. If it was a bad decision, I had to live with them. Do the things that I thought were right and live my life the way I wanted to live it.
Bird would make 2 major decisions in the next year. His marriage to childhood sweetheart Janet Condra dissolved in less than 12 months. But enrolling at Indiana State would put him on a road to personal growth and basketball greatness.
SportsCentury's 50 Greatest Athletes is presented by the company you count on wherever life takes you. General Motors, people in motion. Also brought to you by Burger King, where you can have the delicious king of fries. Burger King, when you have it your way, it just tastes better. By Wheaties, the breakfast of champions. And by Lincoln Financial Group. Lincoln Financial Group, clear solutions in a complex world.
In 1975, Larry Bird arrived at Indiana State, ready to play ball. But he would have to sit out that season as a transfer.
He could practice, and our first 5 couldn't beat him. Coach King, he said, "Larry, I've got to do something to let the first 5 win once in a while. They can't win as long as you're in there." And, you know, Larry kind of smirked, and he said, "Well, just let them take their beating like a man."
He had a mind that was like a camera. He had the best hand-eye coordination, maybe, of anybody that ever played basketball.
In his junior season, Bird led Indiana State to a 23-9 record. Celtics general manager Red Auerbach selected him with the 6th pick in the NBA draft.
I said to Red, "Red, why would you draft this guy, Bird, and you know he's not going to play for this season?" And he looked at me and he said, "Do you know how short a period of time a year is?"
Bird's national recognition carried on the following year. He graced the cover of Sports Illustrated, while he carried the #1 ranked 33-0 Sycamores into the NCAA Finals against Michigan State and his future nemesis.
Magic couldn't wait to give you the best smile and say, "How are you?" make you feel good. Larry Bird would rather say, you don't even say hi to me. I'd rather not get involved with this.
I did not like Larry Bird. He didn't like me. Not because, you know, something happened, but because we were both going after the same thing.
They'll always be linked, won't they? And that's part of the beauty of sports from that '79 NCAA championship. It's pretty hard to say Larry Bird without thinking of Magic Johnson.
June 8, 1979, Bird lands in Boston and signs the NBA's richest rookie contract ever. 5 years at $3.25 million. To Celtic fans, he's a bargain at any price.
this was a white superstar in a world that was dominated by black superstars. And so we know why a lot of people liked him.
Athletically, it turned around when we drafted Larry Bird. Here he came, quote-unquote, the savior. So happened this guy's white, and East Boston, South Boston, people could relate to him. And, you know, Larry Bird is a great white hope.
The racial component of that was so powerful. Bird was the first great white ball player in a number of years. You know, playing for Boston, a town which had a terrible reputation for racial relations going back to the busing crisis of the 70s.
And here he was out there with a quarter of black guys out there talking trash with him, and the rest of the fellas are sitting there going, hey, the boy bad, what can you say? You know, and I think what America saw in this guy was somebody who really didn't see race.
You get your kind of identity from, you know, your superstar, Larry. And Larry was a beer-drinking, lunch bucket type of player.
He was in a fight during the playoffs in a bar in Boston, and he was interviewed later, and people said, well, what does this mean, Larry? He says, it means that ordinary people shouldn't think of me as a hero.
Bird fights Kareem, slings the elbow, and now is yelling at Larry Bird.
You could never back down, because once you do, people look at you different. You had to stand up for everything you believed in, and even if it's the one playing basketball, if somebody took the gloves off and wanted to go, you had to go. If you didn't, there's no use playing.
Larry was the originator of getting in your face and talking trash. And then you sit there and you go, what's this guy up in my face talking noise? He ain't that fast, he's slow. But he knew how to aggravate you, agitate you enough to get you out of your game.
Larry Bird is no hick, believe me. But you could stick a straw between his teeth, and he could play the role, and he could convince a lot of mid-America that he was their boy.
You have to kind of separate what he's saying sometimes, because he can take people where he wants them. You know, he enjoys that.
The media begs off with Larry because they're very afraid of him. They're afraid to somehow or another infuriate him. They're afraid to ask the tough questions. He somehow or another has that way of intimidating the media as he intimidated players.
We had a three-point contest at the All-Star break, and Larry walks in and says, I hope all you guys in here are thinking about second place because I'm winning this. Excuse me? And he started shooting, and he just didn't miss.
I remember going to Boston Garden for the first time. I couldn't wait to see it, walk on that floor. And I got there 3.5 hours before game time. And the lights weren't even on the court. But I heard a ball bouncing as I was walking through the corridor. And look who's here 3.5 hours before the game begins, an hour before anyone else would even be in the building other than the popcorn vendor, but Larry Bird.
Larry Bird has always been afraid of failing. And what did that make him do? It made him work harder than anybody else. You know, they talk about Larry Bird practicing in the rain. Larry Bird practicing out by himself all the time, before games, after games. And I think that's the ethic that he brought from that small-town environment.
He knew the janitors and the equipment guys, and those are his guys more than the high-roller luxury box guys. He doesn't like phonies, sniffs them out right away.
It's over. The Boston Celtics have won the World Championship in 1981. It's all over.
It's been a great honor to be out here. There's only one place I'd rather be, French Lick.
I'd much rather guard Michael Jordan than Larry Bird because you have to play the game as a thinker when you're playing him. You have to get inside his mind. Larry wasn't quick, couldn't jump really high, but there was just some sleepless nights.
Bird takes the pop. It's gone. It is.
These two guys generate huge television revenues and start the process of resuscitating the NBA from a league that was hemorrhaging money in many cities to a league that could start to garner big contracts from the television networks.
Larry Bird and Magic Johnson came in and gave basketball a passion, an energy, and enthusiasm that the league was sorely missing.
These guys epitomized team play, the both of them. And that caught on like wildfire. It just was a catalyst for capturing the interest of America.
Magic had more of a white pathology, solid home, good middle-class jobs. Bird had a black pathology and broken home, father commits suicide.
It was like Athens and Sparta. You had the absolute glitz capital of the world, and then an intellectual capital, a blue-collar town. It is the old world. And when the two of them clashed, it really felt like
I missed out on World War II, so here's the closest thing I'm going to see.
When I played, Larry Bird was the only one I feared. A lot of black guys always ask me, could Larry Bird really play that good? I said, man, Larry Bird was so good, it's frightening.
In the 1984 NBA Finals, neither showed any fear when they squared off for the first time in the postseason. With the Celtics down 2-1, Larry called his teammates sissies. They responded by taking the series in 7.
The Boston Celtics have won the World Championship for the 50th time.
Over their careers, Magic held a 22-15 edge in their Lakers-Celtic encounters. But it would be at a taping for a 1984 Converse commercial that they would let their guards down.
I heard Converse made a pair of Bird shoes for last year's MVP. Yep. Well, they made a pair of Magic shoes for this year's MVP. Okay, Magic, show me what you got.
Oh, man, I got to go to French Lick. Okay, Larry Bird, what's going to happen?
A lot of people see Magic and they see this big Showtime and all this stuff, but I didn't see any of it that day. I seen the real Magic Johnson.
In between the takes, we get a chance to talk. And the dialogue is going great, because this is really the first time we got a chance to talk to each other.
We were just sitting there talking about everything in the world instead of basketball.
They couldn't even get us back out on the court to shoot the commercial.
Actually, that day, I see him as Irvin Johnson, not Magic Johnson.
I'm sure that Magic, particularly being the black guy, had no idea that the white guy was poorer than he was.
Larry Bird and Magic Johnson had become friendly rivals.
We're in Los Angeles, and I got a pulled hamstring, so I'm not playing tonight. He walks down to me. Man, I'm sorry you're not playing, but he said, I'm going to tell you what. Since you're here, I'm going to put a show on for you. So you just sit back and watch, okay? And I'm like, man, get out of my face, man. I want to hear that. You know, that's Celtics and the Lakers. Every time he hit one, he look at me. To the greatest basketball player ever, but more important, a friend forever.
They're walking hand in hand into history together. He wanted to whoop the Lakers worse than anything, and Magic in particular. And it's no accident that when Magic announced that he had the AIDS virus, the Bird broke down and cried, teared up, couldn't talk.
When we return, Larry Bird faces retirement, an unresolved piece of the past, and a future back on the boards.
SportsCentury's 50 Greatest Athletes is presented by the company you count on wherever life takes you, General Motors, people in motion. Also brought to you by Nike, by Budweiser. Now is the perfect time to enjoy a brewery fresh Beechwood-aged Budweiser. And by MCI 5-cent Sundays, 5 cents a minute every Sunday.
The top. I think Larry was the mystique. I think Larry was the confidence.
A great save, and he goes flying over the first row.
His tenacity, his will to win, he never gave up, and that's what I admire most about Larry.
Bird is hurt. Bird is down, and he's hurt.
The parquet floor and the championship banners didn't mean anything if Larry Bird wasn't on the court with us.
The whole time in Barcelona, you could tell there was nothing left, and he was a shell of himself there.
He had a clause in his contract that said that if he did not retire by August 15th, that he would have an automatic renewal of his contract for $4.5 million a year. On August 12th, he came into Dave Gavitt, the president of the Celtics, and said, Dave, I can't do it. My back's too bad. I'm going to retire. Gavitt said to him, Larry, why don't you think about it for a week? Bird narrowed his eyes and looked at him and said, look, I know what day this is, and if I'm not going to play, I'm not going to take the money.
I asked him one time, I said, what would it have been like if you had stayed on the sanitation truck? He said, Pete, hopefully I would have been bossed by now.
But tonight I leave you and I say thank you. I'll be around, but tonight my basketball career is officially over, and I had a blast.
He was the kind of guy who probably should have never made it. The Celtics were chastised in some ways for drafting Larry Bird. The Pacers were chastised because everybody thought it was kind of a publicity stunt for hiring him as a coach. But Larry Bird always proves people wrong.
As Bird strives to enrich his basketball heritage, there is at least one unresolved issue in his life off the court. From that ill-fated marriage to Janet Condra, he has a daughter about whom he rarely speaks.
That is the mystery in Larry's life. Why in the world would you basically disown your daughter?
Every time I see him, he tells me he loves me, and then as soon as I leave, you know, I don't hear from him for maybe a year. In my letters, every single time I write my phone number and address, you know, call me, you know, just call and say hi, leave a message, anything.
He has 2 adopted children. Apparently, he is a great father to them. But when you looked at the induction ceremony for Larry going into the Hall of Fame, and you see the 2 adopted children there, and you didn't see his natural-born daughter, there's something wrong.
I don't completely agree with his side of the way that he sees things or the way that he does things, but I understand. There's no sense of me being bitter about it now. I mean, that's just going to make my life worse. It's probably hard for him to show how he feels. You know, maybe he just can't say it.
If Larry would contact Corey today, she'd be so happy. I mean, she would forget any bad feelings that she has had in the past. She just loves him that much.
It's harder for him just because he doesn't know where to start. So hopefully, you know, sometime he'll, you know, come around and understand that, you know, I'm going to be here for a while. So that would give me a lot of hope, you know, and then we can build from that.
So many questions, so few answers. All tied to a childhood in a town called French Lick.
I think sometimes of people who have no family, and I think it's the saddest thing in the world. Because I know right now, if I needed something, that I could call them. They would be there.
Larry will always be the same. He'll always be the same.
All of us are driven by things that when we were young made us insecure, that we want to put back in the closet. The game sets you apart and lifts you up and gives you your place in the community, gives you a legitimacy, a decency, an importance that otherwise was denied you.
With seconds to go in the game, Coach Bird designs a play, then watches from courtside as one of his players takes the last shot. In or out, win or lose, no change registers on his face, no emotion in his eyes. Then we remember him with the ball in hand, wearing that same blank expression, nailing the game winner. At that point, we realize the stoic face is the lasting memory of the 30th greatest athlete of the century. We will see you next week when the 50 greatest athletes of the 20th century continues its countdown with number 29.
This has been a presentation of ESPN, the worldwide leader in sports. For more, log on to ESPN.com, a part of the Go Network. Go.com.